Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to break down Manchester United's narrow win against West Ham, see the key strengths for both sides, where they got their advantages, and how Manchester United were able to squeak by in the second half and what tactical changes they made. But before we get into this video, don't forget to give our video a thumbs up if you do enjoy it. The bell below does give you daily notifications regarding our organic, unfiltered soccer/footy analysis, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. But first, let's get to the starting lineups. We look at Manchester United, more of a 4-2-3-1. Lukaku ahead of Lingard, Mata, and Martial, Pogba and Fred in midfield. Then we get to West Ham, more of a 4-1-4-1. You have Javier Hernandez up front, out in the wider areas, Lanzini, and they want Felipe Anderson, and in midfield, Noble and Snodgrass ahead of Declan Rice. So now let's get into the video, see how Manchester United were able to create their chances and where West Ham found strengths in the opening half. So when we break down the first half between Manchester United and West Ham, there are two key talking areas that we need to break down. One was West Ham's midfield, and two was the ability for West Ham to break down in the wider areas. But first, let's get to the midfield. We see how it lines up right here, and everything makes sense for West Ham. You have Snodgrass against Pogba, you have Noble who could step to Fred, and then you have Declan Rice. But the key area here was Declan Rice. Although he did have a positive game in the opening 45 minutes, there were issues based off the fact that with those two pushing a bit higher, you have Mata here who's floating between the lines, and obviously you have Rice who wants to occupy or cover that space across the pitch, but you had Lingard tucking in as well. So you had Lingard and Mata to either side of the marker, and there they were able to just drop off, pick up the ball, drop off, pick up the ball, and there was nothing that Rice could do because he was being overloaded in those central areas. So that was a big problem for them, because when you think about it, Pogba and Fred weren't really doing much until Fred was able to pick up the ball from deeper positions without any press, and he was able to slide the ball out into wider areas. But for the most part, that is where they were finding their issues, and that was a big problem, because even when we look to the bigger chances that United, or the bigger half chances that United created, a lot of it stems from that simple movement from those two. We look to one in particular. Fred picks up the ball from deep, he slides it across Masuaku for Lukaku breaking into that space, and with Masuaku and Ogbonna coming across, you have Lingard here who shifts behind them to get the poked ball, and just like that you have Mata breaking in behind. Well, Lingard shifted off Rice and he shifted off Ogbonna to break into that space, and then you have Mata breaking across Balbuena, and Lingard's cross is just a bit too heavy and it flies across the 6-yard box, but that's just great movement, and that was because they were being overloaded in those central areas. When we break down the build up to the penalty, yes, it did take a few more seconds to get to that, but what initially started it was, again, Fred dropping off a bit deeper ahead of Snodgrass and ahead of Noble, and he's able to split Noble and Felipe Anderson to find Lingard tucking into that space there. But Rice can't go to him because Mata is also occupying the space in that central area, and that was the biggest problem, which eventually led to Snodgrass colliding into Juan Mata, and that was how they were able to get the penalty. But that was the key talking point for United, because apart from that, you had Pogba, and you had Rojo, who did deliver balls into that right channel for Lukaku to run off Balbuena, but nothing really stemmed from there. And that was a big problem for Manchester United, was that although he was getting into those key areas, they weren't forcing Fabianski into any key saves, and United were struggling to create chances. Martial wasn't getting 1v1s against Zabaleta, another big problem. So that is kind of where everything stemmed from, and that was where United were able to kind of get their chances, and they were fortunate to get that penalty and go into halftime up 1-0. And then even when we look at West Ham, the other issue was that although Lingard and Mata were doing well down that side, it did leave space for Masuaku to get forward and break down the left-hand side against Delo, and that was something that constantly continued, and he was able to get some quality crosses into the box, and it forced Fred to shift out into that area to protect them. When you also look at what West Ham were doing, Javier trying to get crosses into Javier Hernandez, but they lacked the counter-attacking threat without an Antonio or without Arnautovic leading the line, so they struggled there in the opening period despite getting space, because the reason why Masuaku was able to get forward was because Lingard and Mata weren't tracking back because they were caught in central areas. You had Declan Rice, who was able to play passes without being pressed. If they needed more help in midfield, Noble would drop off to pick up the ball, and he was able to push forward. You had Zabaleta making underlapping runs into advanced areas so Felipe Anderson could pick up the ball in deeper positions and run at his markers. And that kind of summed up West Ham in a whole, just struggling to kind of force David De Gea into quality chances, but finding space in midfield as well to make a difference. You look at two opportunities in particular. It's just a ball into Lanzini, who turns his marker in Juan Mata and breaks forward past Fred, past Paul Pogba, and he slides it to Snodgrass, making a run in behind Smalling. They did clear their lines, but again, it's just so simple for them to run at this United defense. We look to another one in particular. It's Noble playing the ball back to Felipe Anderson from a deeper position, and he takes his first touch past Fred, past Rojo, delivers a cross into the box that De Gea kicks away. But when you break down that half, United were able to find space in midfield, and although that did help them in terms of overlapping Rice in the opening period, they weren't efficient in the final third, and that was a big problem. And with that being said, West Ham were still able to get space down that side and have the freedom to go at United. It was a very open half, but now let's get to the second half, see what changes both sides made and how United were able to kill it off. The second half in particular was strictly about mistakes. When we break it down as a whole, West Ham were able to equalize quickly in that second half. And what we did see was it was De Gea with a rollout to Pogba, and Declan Rice did step in. And once Rice steps in, he's able to poke the ball to Lanzini in between Fred and in between Dalot, and he drops it off to Rice again, who squares it to Snodgrass and then plays it back to Lanzini, who's able to gain a yard on Dalot. And what we end up seeing is that Hernandez ends up occupying the center backs, and the ball falls to Felipe Anderson at the far post unmarked because Rojo tucked in with Jones, and he was able to freely fire his shot past De Gea. And that was how they were able to take the lead. And just like that, a simple, silly mistake, and they were able to pounce and execute. Eventually, we saw Solskjaer ditch his initial plan. He took off Juan Mata. He moved to a 4-3-3 with Lukaku shifting out to the right, Rashford up front, and Martial in midfield with Lingard dropping off. So what we ended up seeing here now was we saw somewhat of what they could do with that system, and that's just getting more players onto Masuaku to take him out of the game. And we saw that in one instance, we saw Pogba drop off a bit deeper to get on the ball, played into Lukaku, who dragged out Masuaku, and now we saw what United should be doing, flicking the ball past him for Dalot, who gets behind Felipe Anderson, who isn't renowned for his tracking back skills. It doesn't lead to a quality chance, but it just goes to show that with Lukaku there, you could see why Solskjaer wanted to make that move, have someone run at him, perhaps use his aerial prowess or his aerial superiority to get a ball at the far post, and it made sense. And shortly after that, we saw one key chance that we wouldn't get from Juan Mata in the system, and it's just Snodgrass and it's Noble marking out Fred and marking out Pogba, and Chris Smalling decides to go for a run, and no one picks him up until he gets close to Rice. And as Rice eventually starts to step forward, what we end up seeing is Smalling sliding the ball between Agbana and Masuaku for Rashford, who breaks down that half space, and he fires a low shot on goal that Fabianski saves. But just like that, a bit of pace up front and behind, you have your chances, and that's where they went with it. But eventually West Ham made some changes. They brought on Diagana for Lanzini. They brought on Antonio for Hernandez. And once they brought on Antonio for Hernandez, you kind of saw them play much better because now they had a legitimate threat up front with pace that can make darting runs into the channels. And that's what he was doing. And that was very pivotal because he created two of the better chances that West Ham probably think that should have won them the game. Because when we look at it, a simple throw in from Pogba to Fred, and you have Noble step into him, and he dispossesses Fred, and it falls to Antonio, who brushes off Fred, cuts in between the center backs, and fires a shot off the crossbar. Shortly after that, we see United make some changes. Pereira comes on. You see Greenwood come on for Lukaku. Greenwood moves to the right. We see Pereira move to right back with Dalot to left back, and we see Greenwood eventually try to take on Masuaku, and he loses the battle, and instantly Masuaku slides that ball into the channel for Antonio to run, and he holds up Fred and he holds up Jones, and Diagana is initially making the run, but he stops. And as he stops, we see Antonio play the ball through the box. No one's there, but Diagana gets it back and he locates again Antonio making the run at the far post and he towers over Jesse Lingard as the cross goes over Phil Jones, nods his effort down, and David De Gea makes another key save. But in two instances, you see the threat that Antonio offers you in the channels and going forward with his raw pace and power, and that's simply based off the fact of bringing him on opposed to Javier Hernandez, who is more of a poacher. When we look at that, Declan Rice continued to break up play in midfield. He was doing a good job, whereas for Paul Pogba, he often dropped off a bit deeper to pick up the ball and was just spraying tame diagonal balls out to the wider areas to switch the play, because United didn't look like, besides that Rashford chance, they didn't look like they were going to get a winner here, but they eventually do, and it stems with Pogba once again dropping off a bit deeper, and he's able to slide a ball across Agbana, then across Balbuena, and it's Martial breaking in behind Frederick, who did come on for Zabaleta. He was ahead of him, and he read the play, the mistakes of the two center backs to break forward on goal, and eventually you see Fredericks chase him down before he takes him down in the box, and Pogba converts. When you break down this game as a whole, you saw United trying to have that midfield superiority with Lingard tucking in, and eventually they weren't closing down well either, and it allowed West Ham some chances, but the second half was predominantly about mistakes, and I think both coaches made good substitutions, Rashford bringing on pace, and then Antonio with his ability to run the channels and his power up front. But eventually, you look at United's goal, a mistake. You look at West Ham's opener, a mistake, their equalizer. You look to United's winner, another mistake. And that sums this up as Manchester United stay in the top four race. But let me know what you guys think. Will Manchester United finish in the top four? And what about West Ham? Where do you think they will finish this season? Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.